You ever wonder what it takes to watch the people who controlled your entire life completely lose their grip? I'm not talking about petty arguments or slamming doors, I mean watching their perfect world unravel piece by piece while you stand there, finally free. This isn't some feel-good redemption story. Either it's messy, raw, and more honest than they ever expected me to be. Stick around if you want to hear how I turned their biggest weapon against them and why it changed everything. I never thought I'd spend my 23rd birthday on the side of the road, clutching two overstuffed duffel bags. Watching my parents' taillights fade into the dark, it sounds dramatic, but that's exactly what happened. They didn't even try to hide the disgust on their faces as they told me to leave. My dad's words, "You're on your own now," felt like a slap that burned long after he shut the door. The rain came pouring down like some cruel joke, soaking me before I even realized I was crying. I remember standing there frozen, my sneakers squelching in puddles, wondering how everything unraveled so quickly. I'd always known things were tense at home, but I didn't expect them to make good on their threats. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, the kind where you keep telling yourself this isn't real. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the storm around me. I could feel my breath hitching in my chest, like my body refused to believe I was actually out. But the thing is, that moment wasn't even the worst part. It was realizing I had no plan. I hadn't expected to be kicked out that night, not with a deadline, so final it felt like a guillotine. I stared at the wet bags in my hands, filled with clothes, art supplies, and the pieces of a life I thought I could control. There's nothing quite like realizing the safety net you thought you had was just a leash. That realization broke something in me I didn't even know was there. All the anger I'd buried for years surged up in a messy, choking wave. I wanted to scream at them, to call them back and beg, to tell them they couldn't do this. But my pride wouldn't let me. Or maybe it was the deep, aching fear that even if they let me back in, it would come with more strings, more control, more ways to make me feel small. I knew then that there was no going back not if I wanted to keep any shred of myself intact. That night changed me forever. It stripped away the illusion of family as unconditional love and forced me to see it for what it was. A transaction I'd stopped paying for. The hardest part wasn't the eviction itself. It was realizing they meant every word when they said I was a burden. And in that moment, with the rain soaking my hair and mascara stinging my eyes, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't let them win. My body shook so hard I could barely hold my phone to text my friend. The screen blurry with tears. I could feel the fear in my chest like a physical weight, pressing so hard it hurt to breathe. I'd always thought of myself as resilient, someone who could handle anything life threw at me. But that night, I felt like a scared little kid who'd lost everything. Every memory of family holidays, hugs and warm meals turned to ash in my mouth. I remember hearing my dad's words on repeat, "You're on your own now," echoing in my head like some cruel mantra. It wasn't the first time he'd threatened to cut me off, but it was the first time he actually did it. My mom didn't even look at me when she said it was time to grow up. She just sipped her coffee and scrolled through emails, like sending me into the cold was just another task on her to-do list. The betrayal was complete, and it was chilling. There's something visceral about realizing the people who raised you don't see you as family anymore. My heart pounded in my ears as I stumbled toward my friend's apartment, the duffel bags digging into my shoulders. I kept telling myself to calm down, that I could figure this out, but the fear wouldn't let go. It sank claws into me, reminding me that I had no home, no safety net, and barely enough money to last the week. Even in that panic, there was anger boiling underneath. A red-hot rage that they could just throw me away so easily. I thought about all the times I'd played the good daughter, swallowed my opinions, studied what they wanted me to study, all of it for nothing. They didn't love me, they loved control. And now that I wouldn't play along, they were happy to see me gone. The thought made me sick, made me want to scream at the world for being so unfair. But the fear was stronger than the rage that first night. Fear of sleeping in my car, fear of not having enough to eat, fear of calling someone and hearing them say they couldn't help. Fear that maybe my parents were right about me all along, that I was weak, stupid, incapable of surviving without them. That fear sank deep, and even now, telling this story, I can feel it tighten in my chest. I'm Madison, 23 years old, and until last year, I lived in a perfectly manicured suburb outside of Austin, Texas. You know the kind of neighborhood I mean, the one with perfectly trimmed lawns, HOA rules about mailbox colors, and neighbors who wave while gossiping behind hedges. To anyone looking in, my family was the American dream. We had the big house, the luxury SUV, the curated holiday photos sent out with heartfelt newsletters. But the truth was always a lot darker than that. My parents didn't care about me, they cared about appearances. My mom, Linda, treated me like a prop in her Instagram-ready life. She critiqued everything I wore, everything I said, everything I wanted to be. And my dad, Charles. He was the puppet master with the wallet. As long as he paid the bills, he expected absolute obedience. Love wasn't free, it was conditional on my submission. Growing up in that house felt like living in a museum. Everything looked perfect but was so cold you could see your breath. I'd sneak out back to sit under the old oak tree just to feel like I could breathe. I used to daydream about moving to the city, living in a tiny studio filled with canvases and half-finished art projects. But those dreams felt as impossible as flying to Mars. Every time I tried to assert myself, they tightened the leash. So when they finally kicked me out, it wasn't really a surprise. Not if I'm being honest. The shock wasn't that they did it, but how ruthlessly they planned it. They waited until my birthday. The one day I dared hope for something different. They told me to pack and get out like I was an unwanted tenant, not their daughter. It's funny how you can see something coming for years and still have it knock the wind out of you when it arrives. That night didn't just change where I lived, it changed who I was. It burned away any illusions I had about family or safety. It forced me to confront the fact that if I wanted freedom, I'd have to earn it myself. And yeah, I'd have to fight dirty. I didn't want revenge at first, I just wanted to survive. But when survival turned to anger, I realized I had the means to make them pay. And that's exactly what I plan to do. If you're still here listening to my story, I'd love for you to hit subscribe and join me on this ride, I promise. There's more to come, and you won't want to miss it. Even as I sat shivering in my friend's cramped apartment that first night, something dark began to crystallize in my mind. It wasn't immediate. Ty was too busy crying and trying not to fall apart. But once the shock faded, the anger started to blaze. They thought they could control me forever. And when that failed, they thought they could just cut me off. They thought I'd crawl back. I knew my parents better than they knew themselves. Charles was meticulous but lazy about tech. He never changed his passwords. Linda used the same email for everything. All those years, they forced me to help them set up their online accounts. Turns out, I remembered every detail. It felt like they'd handed me the keys to the kingdom without realizing it. At first, I felt guilty even imagining using that knowledge. I mean, it's not exactly the kind of thing you tell your friends over coffee. But then I remembered the way my dad's face twisted when he called me a burden. The way my mom didn't even blink as she told me to pack my things. The guilt melted away like ice on a Texas sidewalk in July. They wanted me to learn a lesson about responsibility. Fine. I'd teach them one about consequences. I didn't want their money, I wanted them to feel powerless the way I had. To understand what it was like to lose control, to have the rug yanked out from under them. I wasn't trying to destroy them, just knock down the pedestal they'd built on my back. It's strange to admit now, but planning it made me feel alive. Like I finally had some agency. For once, they weren't holding all the cards. I was done playing their perfect daughter. I was ready to be the person they feared most, a woman who didn't need them. And I'd make damn sure they remembered that every time their credit card got declined, if you've ever felt like you didn't belong in your own family, you know the ache I'm talking about. That bone-deep loneliness, even when you're surrounded by people who claim to love you. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until I lost everything in a single night. It's funny how losing safety can make you see the truth so clearly. I don't tell this story to make you pity me. I share it because I know someone out there is living it right now. Maybe you're quietly swallowing your dreams because your parents said they were silly. Maybe you're checking your spending twice because you know they're monitoring your account. Maybe you're lying awake at night wondering if it's really worth it to keep the peace. I want you to know you're not crazy for wanting out. You're not selfish for wanting freedom. Those invisible chains, they wrap around you with money and guilt. I felt every one of them. And I also know what it feels like to break them. It's not easy, it's not clean, but it's possible. And sometimes it's the only way to save yourself. Because here's the thing, family is supposed to be your safe harbor, not your prison. But no one tells you how to leave when the guards at the gate share your last name. I spent so many nights planning an escape I didn't even believe I'd ever take. And when it finally happened, it wasn't a dramatic movie moment. It was humiliating, messy, and cold. But it was also the beginning. The beginning of learning who I was without their voices in my head. The beginning of building something of my own. And yeah, the beginning of a little revenge plan I never thought I'd have the guts to pull off. If you've ever wondered what happens when the good kid finally snaps, well, stick around. I know this isn't your typical feel-good story, but if you're still with me, maybe it's because you see a little of yourself in these words. If that's you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. I'm not just telling my story, I'm sharing how I rebuilt my life from the ground up. One brutal lesson at a time. Growing up, everyone thought we were the perfect suburban family. Our lawn was always trimmed, the house freshly painted, and the holiday cards looked like magazine ads. Linda made sure everyone saw her as the devoted mother with the Pinterest-worthy home. Charles liked to brag about providing for us, pulling up to PTA meetings in his leased BMW. On the outside, we were goals. But inside those walls, it felt like living in a glass box where you couldn't breathe. Conversations were scripted, emotions were controlled, and mistakes were unacceptable. Dinner was silent unless it was time for critiques about my grades or clothes. Even the family dog seemed to know better than to bark too loudly. The quiet was heavy, the kind that wasn't peaceful but suffocating. My room was the only place that felt like mine, covered in half-finished sketches and taped-up inspirations from art blogs. But even there, I'd hear my mom's voice in my head. That's childish. Don't you want something respectable? I learned early not to show her my work. It wasn't worth the size or the way she'd tilt her head with that fake concern. Meanwhile, My dad made sure I knew who paid the bills. "This roof isn't free," he'd say anytime I spoke up. It wasn't just a threat. It was a contract I never signed. Every new school supply or club fee came with strings attached. He'd remind me of it at every opportunity, like he was tallying up debts I could never repay. Love felt like something rented, not given. Even when we had family gatherings, the smiles were forced. My parents performed for their siblings and friends, while I played the obedient daughter role to keep the peace. No one saw the tension in my clenched jaw or the way my fingers dug into my palms under the table. They all bought the lie, and sometimes I almost did too. Linda had a talent for turning compliments into corrections. "You look nice, but maybe try something more flattering," she'd say as she smoothed invisible wrinkles from my clothes. She lived for appearances, measuring success in likes and comments on her posts. Every photo was curated, every moment staged, and I was expected to perform. Being her daughter felt like being an unpaid extra in her personal show. She loved telling people how involved she was in my life, but what she meant was she controlled it. My friends were screened for ambition. My clothes were picked to avoid embarrassment, and my interests were judged by their practicality. Art was a waste of time. Creative dreams were childish. She never said she was disappointed in so many words, but her silence screamed it. I remember the first time I got a B+ in middle school. She didn't yell, she just pursed her lips and tapped the paper like it had personally offended her. "You're capable of better," she said, her voice cold and calm. I felt so small. It wasn't about the grade. It was about proving I was worthy of her approval. And that approval was always just out of reach. Shopping trips became lectures about my taste, my posture, even my facial expressions. She'd hiss at me to smile naturally, as if I could force joy under her gaze. Family photos were worse. She'd adjust my hair and clothes with surgical precision, demanding I stand up straighter, chin higher, like I was her doll. Afterward, she'd post the perfect shot with some caption about blessed family moments. What hurt most wasn't the criticism, it was the indifference to what I actually wanted. She never asked about my art unless it was to suggest I stop. She didn't want to know me. She wanted to shape me into something she could brag about. I spent years trying to shrink myself into that mold before realizing it would never be enough. Charles didn't need to raise his voice to control me. He used money like a leash, and I learned early that financial dependence meant obedience. Whenever I challenged him, he'd remind me who paid for my food, my clothes, my future. "I'm not your ATM," he'd say with a smirk, while simultaneously monitoring every dollar I spent. It was a power he wielded ruthlessly. He liked to call himself responsible while shaming me for any purchase he deemed frivolous. My sketchpads a waste of money, my design software, playthings for hobbyists. Even coffee with friends was questioned. I learned to dread monthly budget reviews where he'd dissect my spending like an accountant balancing the books of a failing business. When I got into the local university with a partial scholarship, he immediately claimed credit. "We sacrificed so you could have this," he announced at dinner. The scholarship didn't cover everything. Of course, that was his leverage. He insisted on joint accounts for convenience, which meant he could see every transaction. Independence wasn't an option. It was a threat. The worst part was how calm he was about it. He didn't yell or insult me directly. He just laid out the rules with the same tone he used to discuss the weather. When I tried to save for an apartment with friends, he called the landlord and killed the deal behind my back. He said I was being irresponsible. What he meant was I was trying to escape. He'd say he was teaching me about real life. But what he was really teaching me was fear. Fear of stepping out of line. Fear of dreaming too big. Fear of losing everything. And that fear kept me obedient for a long time longer than I want to admit. It wasn't until he told me to get out that I realized obedience hadn't bought me security. It had just postponed the inevitable. It's easy to look back and see the signs now. The way they shaped my choices without me realizing. I was praised when I kept quiet and punished with silence when I spoke up. My mom called it teaching manners, but it felt like learning to swallow my own voice. Even little things, like choosing a club at school, came with their input. They weren't suggestions, they were commands in polite language. Holidays were the worst for showing our family dynamic. Everyone dressed perfectly, smiled politely, and followed the schedule down to the minute. Any deviation was met with cold stares. I learned to sit up straight, answer questions the right way, and never reveal too much. Emotions were inconvenient. Crying was embarrassing. Anger was unacceptable. I remember being 10 and crying over a lost art contest at school. Linda looked at me with thinly veiled disgust and told me to stop making a scene. Charles barely glanced up from his laptop. That lesson stuck. Hard pain was private. If it couldn't be used for appearances, it wasn't allowed. My feelings became secrets, buried so deep I forgot how to name them. Their control wasn't always loud or violent. It was quiet, pervasive, and constant. It was in the way they asked questions about my friends, then subtly suggested they were a bad influence. In how they'd offer money for things only if I agreed to their terms. In the way they'd forget promises if I pushed back. It was a web spun so carefully I didn't see it tightening. What I realize now is that their approval was always conditional. I was only worthy if I played the role they wrote for me. Any hint of independence was seen as rebellion, any emotion as weakness. They taught me to doubt myself so thoroughly that even when I finally left, I wasn't sure if I deserved to be free. For years, I played along, because it was easier. I smiled for photos, thanked them for things I didn't want, and laughed at jokes that made my skin crawl. My friends at school thought I had it made: a big house, new clothes, parents who cared about my future. I let them believe it because admitting the truth felt like betraying my family. Or maybe because I couldn't face it myself. But underneath the surface, resentment was growing like a weed. Every time they called me ungrateful for wanting art supplies, I made a mental tally. Each time my dad dissected my spending, I imagined slamming the laptop shut. When my mom corrected my clothes in public, I bit my tongue so hard it bled. The anger had nowhere to go. So it turned inward, eating me alive. I told myself it was normal, that all parents were like this, that I was being dramatic for wanting more. But every time I watched my friends talk to their parents without fear, it hit me that something was off. I remember envying them in a way that felt dirty, like I was wishing for something I didn't deserve. That's how well they trained me. I learned to compartmentalize. I kept my dreams hidden in sketchbooks under my bed. I lied about where I was going so I could sit in the park and draw in peace. I hoarded tiny acts of defiance, like treasure turning off my phone for an hour, saying I didn't want to go to church one Sunday. Each small rebellion felt like oxygen. But the guilt always followed. Looking back, I see that my obedience was survival. I wasn't weak, I was cornered. I did what I had to do to keep a roof over my head and avoid their wrath. But resentment is patient. It doesn't go away, it waits for the right moment to erupt. And when it finally did, it wasn't the clean break I hoped for. It was a wildfire I couldn't control. I used to sit under that old oak tree in the backyard, staring up through the branches and imagining a different life. A studio apartment in the city with canvases stacked against the walls. Working late into the night, paint on my fingers, music blasting without anyone telling me to turn it down. It felt impossible, but necessary to even imagine. Those dreams were my only escape. I'd scribble designs in the margins of my math homework, knowing I'd have to erase them before my parents saw. I'd save images from artists I admired onto hidden folders on my laptop. It was my own private rebellion, a tiny space they couldn't control, even if they didn't know it existed. I remember the first time I told my mom I wanted to be a designer. She didn't even look up from her tablet. "You'll starve," she said flatly. That was it. No discussion, no curiosity about why I loved it. Just a pronouncement that killed the conversation. My dad didn't even pretend to listen. He just said, "Pick something useful," and walked away. But even then, I refused to let the dream die completely. It felt like the only thing that was mine. I'd stay up late applying for internships they didn't know about. I'd work extra shifts at the campus coffee shop, slipping cash into a tin I hid in my closet. I told myself it was for art supplies, but really it was for freedom, a way out. When they finally told me to leave, they thought they were ending my childish fantasy. They didn't realize they were setting it free. Because once they cut me off, there was nothing left to lose. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous thing: you can give someone permission to stop caring about your approval. College was supposed to be my escape, but it turned into another battlefield. I chose graphic design because it felt right, like breathing. My parents treated it like a personal insult. Charles said I was wasting tuition money on doodling. Linda told me I was embarrassing them by not picking something prestigious. Every conversation about school ended in thinly veiled threats. I tried to compromise at first. I added extra business electives to prove I was serious, but it didn't matter. They didn't want me to have choices. They wanted obedience. Sunday dinners became interrogations about my grades and my plans. I learned to eat quickly and disappear before the lectures could start. Even silence wasn't safe. By my senior year, things were boiling over. Charles gave me an ultimatum over roast chicken, like he was announcing the weather. Switch to finance or lose their financial support entirely. He didn't even flinch when I said I couldn't change majors with 3 months left. Linda backed him up, cool as ice, insisting they were only thinking about my future. I remember gripping my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay seated, to pretend I wasn't about to throw up. They didn't care about my future, they cared about control. They were willing to blow up my entire life just to prove they were in charge. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in. That night, I barely slept, going over every option. Drop out, work 3 jobs, beg them to reconsider. My chest felt tight with panic. But even then, some part of me was done. Done groveling, done being the obedient daughter. I didn't know it yet, but the decision to walk away was already made. They didn't even try to hide how they used money to keep me in line. My accounts were joint for convenience, but Charles had the passwords memorized. I'd see charges questioned in real. A $4 coffee would earn me a lecture. Art supplies? Forget it. He'd freeze transfers or call me wasteful. It was surveillance disguised as support. When I tried to save for my own place, he found out instantly. He went behind my back, called the landlord, and canceled my application. He told me I wasn't ready to be on my own. I remember standing in my dorm hallway, clutching the phone so hard my fingers ached, listening to him explain it like he was doing me a favor. Linda's tactics were quieter, but just as sharp. She'd send me emails with advice about budgeting that were really just passive-aggressive lists of my supposed failures. She'd talk about my cousin, who had an accounting job and a condo at 23, as if I was some cautionary tale. Her disappointment was a permanent fixture in the air. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the message. You can't survive without us. They wanted me scared of the world, dependent on their approval. I remember checking my bank balance late at night, heart racing, hoping I hadn't triggered some new conflict. My finances weren't mine. They were another weapon they could use to cut me down. Sometimes I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing arguments I'd never say, telling them I'd figure it out on my own. That I didn't need them. But in the end, I always stayed quiet. I didn't want to lose the roof over my head. I didn't want to test if they'd actually cut me off, until of course, they did. I didn't go from obedient daughter to revenge planner overnight. It started with small rebellions. Turning off my phone for hours so they couldn't check in, staying out past their curfew, and ignoring the guilt trip voicemails. Every time I did it, my heart pounded. Equal parts terror and exhilaration. It felt like claiming tiny pieces of freedom. I started taking extra shifts at the campus coffee shop and asking for part of it in cash. I'd hide the bills in an old jewelry box under my dorm bed. It wasn't much, but it felt like insurance my first step. Toward independence they couldn't monitor. I guarded that box like it was sacred. It was hope in crumpled 20s. I applied to internships without telling them, editing my portfolio late into the night in the campus library. I told my parents I was studying for midterms when really I was sketching designs for real clients. I remember hitting submit on those applications with shaking hands. Part of me felt like a criminal. Part of me felt free. My best friend Brooke was the only one who knew everything. She'd sit with me on the floor of her apartment while I planned my escape, offering snacks and reality checks in equal measure. She told me I wasn't crazy, that wanting to be free wasn't wrong. Sometimes her belief in me was the only thing that kept me from breaking. Those acts of defiance didn't fix anything overnight, but they planted the seed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, even if they didn't know it yet. I was preparing for the day I wouldn't need them. A day that came sooner and uglier than I ever expected. As my 23rd birthday approached, the tension at home was electric. Conversations became short and clipped. Every meal a silent standoff. Charles would clear his throat like he wanted to speak, then just glare at his plate. Linda stayed busy on her tablet, fingers tapping furiously, pretending she couldn't hear the simmering resentment. The air felt heavy, like a storm that refused to break. I tried to keep my head down, focusing on finals and my portfolio. But even then, I caught Linda watching me with that critical squint. She asked about my plans for after graduation with forced cheer that couldn't hide the edge. I answered carefully, choosing words like stepping over glass. It didn't matter, she heard defiance in everything I said. Brooke noticed it too. She called me one afternoon after my mom reached out to her behind my back. She asked about your birthday plans. Maddie, it felt weird. My stomach dropped hearing it. I knew then they were coordinating something, but I didn't know what. I spent the rest of the day jumpy, checking my phone for some awful revelation. I held on to a tiny, fragile hope that maybe they'd soften. Maybe my birthday would be different this year. Maybe they'd remember I was still their daughter. That hope felt pathetic, even as I clung to it. I bought myself a single cupcake from the campus bakery, just in case no one else remembered. It sat in my bag like a sad little wish. The night before my birthday, I stayed late at the library. I couldn't stand being in that house, listening to them not talk about what we all felt. When I got home, they were sitting in the living room in silence, the TV on but ignored. They didn't look at me. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling like every step was the beat of a funeral drum. The morning of my birthday started like any other Tuesday. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, and for a split second, I let myself believe it would be okay. I even forced a good morning when I walked into the kitchen. Linda didn't look up from her tablet. Charles just sipped his coffee. No acknowledgement, no smile, just silence that pressed against my ribs. I sat at the table swallowing down the panic. Finally, I blurted it out. It's my birthday today. Linda barely glanced at me. We're aware of the date, that was it. No card, no hug. Not even a fake smile. I felt my face burn with humiliation. I wanted to disappear into the floor. I remember my hands shaking as I tried to pour coffee. All day on campus, friends sent texts and goofy memes that made me smile through tears. Brooke took me to lunch, giving me a friendship bracelet she made in my favorite colors. It felt like someone remembered I existed. But the dread wouldn't leave. My phone buzzed with Brooke's warning that my mom had called her again. I felt like prey being tracked. That night, I walked in to find them waiting in the living room. Charles had his financial discussion folder on the table. Linda sat rigidly, lips a thin line. Sit down, Charles said, like I was an employee in trouble. I perched on the edge of the couch, backpack still on, trying to stop my heart from pounding out of my chest. The words that followed felt like knives. They laid out my financial irresponsibility with highlighted bank statements, called my dreams childish, said they'd been more than patient. Then Charles said it. "You're on your own now," Linda added, "tonight on my birthday." I remember the blood rushing in my ears so loud I didn't hear the rest. Just that final, irrevocable command. I don't remember packing. I just remember throwing things into duffel bags, tears blurring everything. My hands shook so badly I could barely zip them. They gave me 30 minutes. 30 minutes to erase my life from their house. Charles called up the stairs twice to remind me of the time limit. Linda stayed downstairs, scrolling on her phone. I called Brooke, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. She didn't even hesitate. "Come here, right now." I told her I'd drive myself, I couldn't wait. I lugged the bags down, each one heavier than my heart. They watched me like strangers, cold and silent. Charles demanded my house key before I could leave. I handed it over with shaking fingers. When the door shut behind me, I heard the deadbolt slide into place. I stood on the porch for a moment, the rain starting to fall, soaking my hair. I felt stripped bare, exposed to the world in the worst way. I remember whispering happy birthday to me with a hollow laugh that sounded like a sob. Driving to Brooks was a blur of wet roads and headlights. I parked outside her apartment and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers went numb. She came running out in her socks, pulling me into a hug so tight I thought I'd break. We carried my bags inside together, her roommate offering me the couch without question. That first night, I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the rain on the window, watching shadows on the ceiling, feeling the weight of what had happened settle onto my chest. I had no plan, no money, no home. But for the first time in years, I didn't have to lie about being okay. And somehow, that felt like the smallest flicker of freedom. Brooke's apartment was small, barely enough for her and her roommate. But they made space for me without question. I slept on their lumpy old couch with my bags stacked beside me like a sad barricade. Every night, I lay awake listening to them whisper about bills, feeling guilty for adding to their burden. The fear of overstaying my welcome kept me on edge. I tried to keep it together during the day, pretending I was fine, but my eyes were bloodshot and my clothes wrinkled from living out of a duffel. I showered in their tiny bathroom with the cracked tile and tried not to sob too loudly. Every morning, I practiced smiling in the mirror before going to class, but my eyes betrayed me. University didn't feel like an escape anymore, felt like another place to hide how badly I was falling apart. I'd drift off in lectures, jerking awake in a panic. Sure, I'd missed something important. My professors started to notice, their gentle concern cutting me like knives. I hated being the charity case, the broken girl. Brooke kept telling me it was okay to be there as long as I needed, but I saw the worry in her eyes. I started stashing my bags in my car during the day so I didn't clutter the living room. At night, I lay awake, counting every dollar in my head, realizing it would never be enough. The anxiety sat in my chest like a brick. There were moments I almost called home. I'd stare at my phone, thumb hovering over the contact, but I could hear Charles's voice in my head. "You can't survive without us." I refused to prove him right. I would rather sleep in my car forever than give them the satisfaction of watching me crawl back. First thing the next morning, I was outside the campus financial aid office before it opened. I clutched my student ID like a lifeline, rehearsing my story in my head over and over. When they finally let me in, I tried to explain, voice cracking with shame. The counselor listened patiently, but the words felt foreign coming out of my mouth. She was kind, but blunt. "Your FAFSA lists your parents' income. Unless you can prove legal emancipation or self-support for a year, you're dependent." I sat there stunned. I wanted to scream that they literally kicked me out. But she handed me a packet of emergency loan applications like it was a consolation prize. I walked out clutching those papers like they were ashes. No amount of crying was going to change the bureaucracy. I slumped onto a bench outside, head in my hands, watching students rush by with coffee and laughter. No one noticed the girl falling apart in the middle of campus. It felt like being invisible in the worst way. Later that day, I tried calling every number on the list she'd given me. Emergency housing had a 2-week waitlist. Scholarship offices said their deadlines had passed. The work-study coordinator offered sympathy, but no immediate hours. Each rejection hit like a physical blow, draining what little hope I had left. That night, I sat in Brooke's living room, filling out loan applications with shaking hands. The numbers didn't add up. I felt like I was signing away my future for a chance to keep going. When Brooke tried to talk to me, I just shook my head. I didn't have the words to explain the black hole opening in my chest. The coffee shop where I worked was the only place that felt even slightly stable. My manager, Tony, was rough around the edges, but had a good heart. When I told him what happened, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'll get you more hours." That promise felt like oxygen in a burning building. But even with the extra shifts, it wasn't enough. 10 more hours at minimum wage barely covered food, let alone rent. I'd finish a late shift, close up shop, and walk out into the cold wondering where I'd sleep if Brooke's place fell through. My feet ached constantly, and my knuckles were raw from scrubbing counters. I started eating the cheapest food I could find. Instant noodles, dialed bagels from the shop that Tony let me take home. I rationed granola bars like gold. Brooke tried to share groceries with me, but I always felt like a thief accepting them. Every meal felt like swallowing shame. There were nights I just stayed at the shop late, mopping slowly so I didn't have to go back and face the couch. I'd lean against the counter, arms folded, trying not to cry. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while I stared at my reflection in the glass door, hating the hollow-eyed girl who stared back. Despite everything, I refused to quit school. I dragged myself to class, assignments half done, hair unwashed, trying to listen even as my vision blurred from exhaustion. Professors pulled me aside asking if I was okay. I lied every time. Just busy. I couldn't tell them the truth. I was too afraid it would make everything even more real. One of the worst moments came late one night when I finally checked my bank balance. I'd avoided it for days, terrified of what I'd see. The screen loaded slowly on Brooke's crappy Wi-Fi, but when it did, my heart dropped. My parents had already cut themselves off the joint account, but not before draining everything they'd claimed was theirs. I sat there staring at the pitiful remaining balance, hands shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. It wasn't even enough to cover a week of groceries. They'd left just enough to say they hadn't abandoned me completely, but it was an insult more than a gesture. I felt my face flush with rage, but there was no one to yell at. Charles didn't even bother to tell me. No warning, just a quiet, calculated severing of any lifeline. He'd always loved financial control, but this was the final power play. I imagined him at his laptop, smug, convinced I'd come crawling back. Linda would just shrug and say, "We had no choice." I could practically hear them. It wasn't just about the money. It was about knowing they could do it. And they would about realizing there wasn't even a shred of compassion left for their own daughter. Any pretense of love burned away in that transaction. The message was clear. Survive without us if you can. And deep down, they didn't think I could. I didn't cry right away. I went numb, scrolling through the app over and over like the numbers might change. Eventually, I just powered off my phone and sat in silence, hugging my knees on Brooke's couch. I felt so small, so stupid for ever thinking they'd show mercy. It was like watching the last door slam shut in my face. As if cutting me off wasn't enough, they made sure to control the story. Linda called every family member who'd listen, painting me as some rebellious, ungrateful brat. According to her, I'd refused their help and chosen to leave. She cried on the phone about how hard it was to watch me throw my life away. And people believed her. Brooke showed me a screenshot her cousin sent from Facebook. Linda had posted some cryptic status about letting go of those who refuse guidance. The comments were full of sympathy. "You're such a strong mother." Praying for your family, I felt physically sick reading them. It was like watching my own character be murdered in real time. Charles didn't bother with social media. He went old school, calling his brothers and cousins, spinning tales about my poor choices and wasted potential. He made sure everyone knew how much money they'd invested in me. Like I was a failed business, not a human being. I imagined them nodding along, clucking their tongues in judgment. I even got a few texts from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. "We're so sorry you're going through this. Maybe it's time to listen to your parents." As if I was some stubborn child refusing medicine, I deleted them without replying, but the words stuck like burrs. It wasn't enough for them to cut me off. They had to make sure I felt alone. Brooke and her roommate tried to cheer me up, but I couldn't stop replaying the lies. I wanted to post the truth everywhere, scream it into the void. But part of me was too tired to fight. The humiliation wasn't just losing my home or money. It was realizing they'd won the PR battle before I even knew it started. If you're hearing this and it hits close to home, please take a second to like the video and subscribe so we can keep sharing stories that deserve to be told. It helps get these voices out. There are people like me who had nowhere to turn. And if you feel moved, consider clicking super thanks down below. It's a simple way to support the channel so we can keep bringing you real stories without sugarcoating. Every bit helps keep us going and make sure these truths don't stay hidden. Now, let's get back to what happened next. After a few nights on Brooke's couch, something unexpected happened. My anger sharpened into focus. Between the humiliation and the panic, I found myself obsessing over how much they loved their perfect image. The social media posts, the country club dinners, the smug credit card swipes. It all depended on maintaining a very fragile illusion. I started remembering little details they'd bragged about over dinner. The rewards cards they used for everything. The automatic payments Charles set up for their fancy car lease. The designer shopping sprees Linda considered her birthright. It was all debt, all credit. Without those cards, their world didn't just get messy, it collapsed. Brooke noticed me scribbling notes one night and raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" I hesitated before admitting the truth. Just ... thinking. She didn't push. But I knew I wasn't fantasizing. I was planning. They'd made sure I had nothing left to lose. I wasn't going to let them walk away clean. Part of me hated even thinking about it. It felt ugly, vindictive, but another part felt justified. They'd left me homeless and humiliated. Why should they get to keep their perfect facade? Why should they get to keep telling everyone I was the problem while they sipped wine and enjoyed their spotless credit? It wasn't about stealing from them. I didn't want their money. I wanted them to feel it. The way I'd felt carrying my life in 2 duffel bags in the rain. The way I felt reading those Facebook posts. The way I felt when Charles said, "You're on your own now." I wanted them to taste powerlessness for once. I didn't know exactly how to pull it off at first, but then I remembered something from college. My friend Tyler, the cybersecurity nerd, he once told me over coffee how shockingly vulnerable most people were with online banking. I hit him up late one night with a shaky voice, and to my surprise, he didn't hesitate. We met at an all-night diner. He listened to my story without flinching, just nodding occasionally, eyes serious. When I told him I didn't want to steal anything, just disrupt them, he leaned back in the booth and exhaled. "That's doable," he said. His voice was calm, measured, like we were talking about homework. He explained the difference between fraud and using my legitimate access. I hadn't hacked anything. They'd made me set up their accounts years ago. I knew the passwords they never bothered to change. Tyler walked me through credit freezes, fraud alerts, password resets. All things technically legal, but massively inconvenient. The beauty of it was that none of it would be permanent damage. No money stolen, no credit ruined forever, but it would throw their life into chaos for weeks. Auto payments would fail, new cards would need to be mailed. Phone verification would tie them up for hours. Their precious image would take hits in real time. Tyler made me promise I'd think carefully about it. He reminded me revenge doesn't heal the wound, just keeps you connected to the pain. I heard him, but I also knew I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. I wanted them to know what it felt like when someone who's supposed to love you decides you're disposable. I spent nights in the university library, surrounded by students pulling all-nighters, but I wasn't writing essays. I was researching credit bureaus, bank security protocols, and customer service loopholes. My fingers flew over the keyboard while my heart thumped like a war drum. I wasn't reckless. I wanted every step to be precise. I documented everything. The email confirmations from when I'd helped them set up accounts, the passwords I remembered, their security questions I'd answered for them over the phone because they couldn't be bothered. It was all there, in black and white. I was making sure no one could ever say I broke the law. I even set up a new email account with encrypted services. I didn't want anything traced back to Brooke or Tyler. I didn't want them getting caught in my mess. This was mine alone. My plan was to use legitimate tools, the same fraud protection they bragged about being so responsible with. Just a little ... thoroughly. I made notes about their billing cycles. Charles's car lease payment that hit every third of the month, Linda's credit card for the designer boutiques, the country club membership that needed the card on file. Timing would be everything. I didn't want permanent damage. I just wanted maximum disruption. Every detail felt like taking back a piece of myself. It was twisted, I know. Planning someone else's chaos while mine was barely held together with duct tape. But at least it was mine. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control of something even if it was just my rage. Tyler and I met one last time before I put the plan in motion. We chose an out-of-the-way coffee shop where no one knew us. He had his laptop open, dark circles under his eyes, but he was focused. He made me walk through everything step by step, challenging every loophole I wanted to use. He wasn't there to encourage revenge. He was there to keep me from screwing it up. We sat there for hours, my leg bouncing under the table. Tyler pointed out security questions, password patterns, and redundant email recoveries my parents never updated. He shook his head at how easy it all was. "They think paying for things makes them smart," he said. I could only nod, feeling a sick satisfaction in my gut. He made me promise I wouldn't cross any lines I couldn't come back from. No theft, no impersonation for profit. Just freezing, securing, and locking down. He told me it was basically forcing them to do their own fraud prevention on hard mode. It felt like poetic justice. The very safety nets they loved would be their downfall, at least for a little while. When we wrapped up, Tyler looked at me seriously. "I get it," he said. "I really do. But make sure this is about protecting yourself too." I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I wasn't sure. I wanted revenge. I wanted to see them squirm. But I also wanted the freedom to stop caring about them, even if I wasn't ready yet. We parted with a quick hug in the parking lot, the cold night air biting my cheeks. I slid into my car, staring at the dashboard for a long time. My heart raced like I'd just pulled off a heist. In that moment, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like someone who could finally fight back. The night I did it, I sat alone in Brooke's living room with only the glow of my laptop for company. I took a deep breath before logging in with the passwords they'd forced me to memorize. It felt intimate in a gross way, like reading someone's diary. But they'd handed me the keys years ago, trusting I'd never use them. I didn't change any balances. I didn't steal a cent. I used the tools available to every account holder. Credit freezes, fraud alerts, password resets. Each click was deliberate, designed to lock them out without destroying anything. I imagined Charles's face when he couldn't make his car payment or Linda's panic at the boutique checkout. I set up alerts on the new email account I'd made, watching the confirmations roll in. Each one felt like a tiny explosion in their carefully curated lives. I didn't want permanent damage, just a delay, a hiccup big enough to shatter the illusion of control. Let them call customer service for hours. Let them wait for new cards in the mail. My fingers trembled when I finally logged out. I closed the laptop slowly, exhaling like I'd just run a marathon. My stomach twisted with nausea and adrenaline. Was I a monster for doing it? Maybe, but I remembered standing in the rain on my birthday with nowhere to go. I remembered Linda's blank stare, Charles's dismissive wave. I whispered into the empty room, "Happy birthday to me." It wasn't triumphant. It was raw, broken, but it was mine. For the first time since they threw me out, I felt something that wasn't fear or shame. I felt power, even if it was ugly, even if it wouldn't last. The fallout was more satisfying and more horrifying than I expected. Within days, I got a message from my cousin asking if I'd heard about my parents' identity theft scare. I almost laughed out loud. Charles had called the bank in a panic when his corporate card failed during a client lunch. Linda's card got declined at her precious salon. They told everyone they were victims of a psychotic. Linda even posted about it online, fishing for sympathy while subtly bragging about how important they were. "We're dealing with fraud issues, so sorry if we're hard to reach." The comments were all prayers and hugs. Meanwhile, I watched for my anonymous email as their accounts locked tighter. Mutual friends started whispering about money problems. The country club flagged their membership when dues bounced. Charles had to postpone client meetings to handle administrative issues. Linda canceled brunches, blaming her schedule when I knew she was too embarrassed to face questions. Their carefully built image cracked like cheap porcelain. Brooke caught me checking the alerts one night and called me out gently. "You're getting a little obsessed." She wasn't wrong. I refreshed the inbox over and over, heart pounding each time I saw another failed login attempt. It felt good. Too good. It was like scratching an itch until it bled. Even as I enjoyed watching them flail, something dark settled in my chest. This wasn't justice. It was revenge. Plain and simple. I hadn't fixed anything. I'd just given them something else to blame. And the worst part, they still had no idea it was me. They'd keep telling themselves they were victims, never realizing they'd created the enemy themselves. In the beginning, it felt like victory. I'd sit on Brooke's couch, watching my inbox light up with fraud alerts, my knees pulled to my chest, grinning like a maniac. It was twisted, but I couldn't help it. After so many nights feeling powerless, every failed payment notification was proof I wasn't helpless anymore. It felt like balance, but the rush faded fast. The more I watched them scramble, the more it felt empty. No one called to apologize. No one admitted they were wrong. They just spun a new narrative, victims of cruel hackers, sympathetic martyrs in their perfect suburban tragedy. They didn't learn anything. They just got better at playing the part. I started feeling sick after checking my email, the adrenaline replaced with guilt. I wasn't fixing anything. I wasn't exposing the truth. I was just playing their game on my terms. I remembered Tyler's warning in the diner. Revenge keeps you connected. I'd scoffed at the time, but now his words felt like they were carved into my ribs. Brooke noticed before I did. She'd find me staring blankly at my screen at 2 a.m., fingers hovering over the refresh button. "Madison," she'd say softly, "this isn't helping you." I'd snap back or pretend not to hear. But deep down, I knew she was right. Watching them fall apart didn't put my life back together. The worst part was realizing I was becoming like them. Manipulative, calculating, obsessive. I'd justified it as justice, but it was just vengeance dressed up in legal loopholes. And seeing that truth hurt in a way even homelessness hadn't, because it meant they still had power over me. Even when I thought I'd taken it back. My laptop became my lifeline, my confessional, my prison. I'd open it before brushing my teeth, scanning for new alerts. Every declined payment or locked account brought a spark of grim satisfaction. I told myself I was just checking. But really, I was feeding a monster I didn't know how to kill. It consumed me. Classes slipped further out of focus. I missed deadlines, scribbled half-hearted sketches. My professors noticed immediately. One asked if everything was okay, and I lied through my teeth. Just busy. The truth felt too ugly to say. That I was so obsessed with their misery, I was ruining my own future. Brooke grew quiet around me. We stopped talking about real things and only spoke in surface-level exchanges. She didn't want to fight, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. It stung worse than any insult my parents had thrown at me, because she actually cared. And I was pushing her away to refresh my inbox. Even my body was screaming at me to stop. Headaches became a daily ritual. My stomach twisted itself in knots. I slept in broken, restless spurts, waking with my heart racing for reasons I couldn't name. I stopped eating real meals, surviving on coffee and granola bars, shaking by mid-kafta. I was punishing myself as much as them. I knew it couldn't go on. But knowing wasn't enough to make me stop. I felt like if I let go even for a second, they'd win. They'd keep living their lie while I suffered in silence. So I clung tighter, white-knuckled, even as it dragged me down with them. I didn't want to admit it, but I was addicted to the destruction. The price of revenge was paid in everything else I used to care about. My sketchbook gathered dust in my bag, untouched. Once, it had been my sanctuary, my dream of a future on my own terms. Now, I could barely look at it without feeling like a fraud. What kind of artist chooses sabotage over creation? Assignments piled up in my inbox unanswered. Professors who used to praise my work began sending curt reminders. I stopped going to office hours entirely. Sitting there pretending I cared about color theory felt absurd when my life was in freefall. I could almost hear my dad saying, "See? This is why you'll fail." My shifts at the coffee shop suffered too. Tony, who'd given me those precious extra hours, started looking at me with worried eyes. "Everything okay?" he asked one night while I clumsily spilled milk everywhere. I lied again, just tired, but he knew. Everyone could see I was unraveling, even if I refused to admit it. Brooke tried to get me to talk, but I shut her out. I hated seeing the pity on her face. The frustration? She'd done so much for me, and I was repaying her by turning her living room into my surveillance bunker. Sometimes I'd catch her and her roommate whispering about me when they thought I couldn't hear. I didn't blame them. I told myself it was temporary. Just until they learned their lesson. Just until they felt the sting. But deep down, I knew there was no finish line. No point where I'd wake up and feel whole again. Because this wasn't a plan for the future. It was me throwing everything I had onto the same pyre. I'd watched them light for me. Brooke finally snapped one night when she found me glued to my screen at 3 a.m. She didn't yell, but her voice trembled with anger and worry. "Maddie, this has to stop." I barely looked up, muttering that I was busy. She crossed her arms and shook her head. "You're not busy, you're obsessed." Her words hit harder than I expected. She sat on the arm of the couch, watching me with tired eyes. "I get it. They hurt you, they deserve it. But look at you. You're becoming someone you don't even like." I tried to roll my eyes, but my throat felt tight. Because she wasn't wrong. I'd traded one prison for another, and I'd built this one myself. I remember snapping back at her, something cruel I don't even want to repeat. She didn't flinch, just sighed. "You're pushing away the only people who actually care about you." I felt my cheeks burn with shame. The silence after that was brutal. I closed the laptop slowly, suddenly exhausted in a way caffeine couldn't fix. The next morning was worse. Brooke didn't say much, just handed me coffee and left early for class. Her roommate, Kim, barely looked at me. I realized I'd poisoned the only safe place I had. The couch felt colder than ever, the walls too close. For the first time, I wondered if I was really any better than my parents. That day in class, I couldn't focus. I kept hearing her voice in my head, over and over, "You're becoming someone you don't even like." I stared at my blank notebook, fingers limp. It was like I'd forgotten how to create anything that wasn't destruction. And for the first time since they kicked me out, I wanted to cry not out of anger but out of grief. I started seeing the parallels in ways that made my stomach turn. Charles had always been the master of control calculating, methodical, never raising his voice but always getting his way. I'd mocked him for it, hated him for it. And now, here I was, doing the same damn thing, except my target was him. It felt disgusting. Linda had her image to protect at all costs, twisting stories so she always looked like the victim. I thought I was exposing her, but really, I was just writing my own story to justify what I'd done. I'd told myself I was different because I had a reason. But reasons don't make the damage hurt less. They just make it easier to ignore. I remembered all the times I'd sworn I'd never be like them. That I'd never weaponize love or money. That I'd never manipulate someone to feel small so I could feel big. But I was doing it now, refreshing my email for updates about their misery, like it was a game. Watching them squirm didn't make me free. It chained me to them even tighter. It was the worst kind of self-awareness, realizing you're hurting yourself just to prove a point. Revenge felt good for 5 seconds, then rotted in my gut for hours. I couldn't even enjoy it without imagining how they'd justify it if they knew. They'd call me unstable, prove they were right to throw me out, and that possibility terrified me. I realized then that the plan hadn't been about justice. It had been about connection. I didn't want them to forget me, even if the only way left was making them miserable. That truth sat heavy in my chest, a cold weight I couldn't shake. I didn't know how to forgive them, but I was starting to realize I needed to forgive myself first. One night after class, I sat in the computer lab long after everyone left. My inbox was open, full of bank alerts, password change requests, endless signs of their chaos. I hovered over the refresh button for what felt like hours. My heart raced like it always did, waiting for that next hit of satisfaction. But this time, I didn't click. I closed the tab slowly, fingers trembling. It felt like stepping off a cliff. Letting go meant accepting they'd never see what they'd done to me, that they'd never apologize or change. It meant admitting they had hurt me in ways I couldn't fix by hurting them back. My throat felt tight, eyes burning with unshed tears. Brooke found me in there, sitting in the dark, and didn't say anything at first. She just sat beside me, her warmth a quiet reassurance. Finally, I whispered, I don't want to be them. She didn't say I know or it's okay. She just squeezed my hand. That simple gesture made the tears finally fall. After that, I made a plan that wasn't about them at all. I emailed instructions to their accounts to help them unfreeze everything. No signature, no confession, just a quiet ending. I told Tyler what I did, and he smiled sadly. That's the hardest part, he said. Knowing when to stop. I nodded. Because he was right. Walking away didn't feel like victory. It felt like surrender. But it was the first real act of freedom I'd made since they kicked me out. I chose to stop letting them live rent-free in my head. I chose to focus on surviving for me, not out of spite. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night without checking my phone. After I let go of the revenge, I finally faced the reality of my living situation. Brooke's couch had been a lifeline, but it wasn't home. I applied for emergency student housing and got a tiny studio in graduate housing after someone withdrew mid-semester. When I unlocked that door for the first time, I stood there breathing deeply, savoring the quiet. It wasn't much: a twin bed, a tiny desk, a kitchenette that barely fit one person. But it was mine. No one could kick me out on a whim. No one could dictate my bedtime or lecture me over my choices. I remember dropping my bags in the middle of the floor and laughing through tears. It was the first laugh that hadn't felt forced in months. I spent that first night unpacking completely, arranging my sketchbooks on the desk like sacred objects. I didn't have a lot, but every item was truly mine. For the first time in forever, I didn't have to hide anything. No worried glances from Brooke. No passive-aggressive sighs from Linda. Just me and my little room. The housing program wasn't fancy, but it offered safety and stability. I met other students in crisis, people who'd been through the same kind of family rejection. Hearing their stories made me feel less alone. We shared microwave meals and late-night talks about dreams that felt within reach again. It was community in the rawest, most honest sense. That tiny studio became a symbol of survival, a place where I could start over, even if I was starting from nothing. It wasn't about proving anything to my parents anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could exist without them, that I could make a life worth living, even if it wasn't the life they wanted for me. Once I had stable housing, I focused on my next battle: money. My old coffee shop job helped, but it wasn't enough. I met with my design professor, who had seen me unravel that semester. Instead of scolding me, she offered me a campus job designing flyers and event materials. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid, and it was in my field. That job became my lifeline. Every paycheck felt like a small declaration of independence. I started tracking every dollar, determined never to let anyone use money to control me again. I opened my own account, set up alerts, built a spreadsheet. It was obsessive. Maybe, but it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to check my balance. The work wasn't easy. Balancing classes, a job, and healing from everything that had happened nearly broke me. But it also gave me purpose. Each finished poster, each satisfied department head, reminded me I wasn't useless. That I had value beyond what Charles or Linda ever saw. I was building a portfolio and a new sense of self-worth. My coworkers didn't know my story, but their casual kindness healed me in small ways, sharing stale donuts at late-night shifts, trading jokes while we wrestled with the copier. They treated me like a person, not a disappointment or a burden. It was jarring at first, then addictively comforting. I started saving again, even if it was just a few bucks here and there. I watched that balance grow like a promise. I wasn't rich, I wasn't even comfortable, but I wasn't helpless anymore. And that changed everything about how I saw myself. Eventually, I gave in to Brooke's gentle pushing and went to the campus counseling center. I sat in the waiting room, knees bouncing, convinced I'd chicken out. But when they called my name, I stood. That felt like a victory by itself. My counselor was a calm woman with kind eyes who let me talk until my throat was raw. The first session was mostly me sobbing and apologizing for crying so much. She handed me tissues without judgment. "You've been carrying this alone for too long," she said softly. Hearing that made something crack inside me. It wasn't an accusation. It was permission to let go. We talked about the betrayal, the manipulation, the lies my parents told about me. She didn't try to sugarcoat it or excuse them, but she also didn't let me wallow in rage forever. "Revenge is just another chain," she told me once. "It keeps you tied to the person who hurt you." That line stayed with me long after our session ended. Week by week, I learned to name things I'd buried. Fear, shame, anger, grief. We worked on boundaries. On recognizing when I was slipping into old patterns, she reminded me that I couldn't control whether they changed, but I could choose not to let them define me anymore. It was slow work, but it felt like real healing. I walked out of those sessions lighter, even on days I cried all the way home. Therapy didn't fix everything, it didn't erase what happened, but it helped me stop trying to punish myself for surviving. It taught me I could be more than their failure, their disappointment. I could just be Madison, and that was enough. Brooke and I had our rough patches after everything that happened. There were days she didn't know what to say, and days I couldn't look her in the eye without feeling guilty. But slowly, we rebuilt what had cracked. She never made me beg to stay. She just kept saving a spot for me on the couch, even when I didn't need it anymore. We started having late-night talks again, the kind where you share dreams without fear. She told me she was proud of me for getting help, for finding my own place. I told her she'd saved my life more times than I could count. There were tears. There was laughter. It felt like family, the kind I chose instead of the one I lost. Kim, her roommate, who had once kept her distance, started warming up to bed. She'd leave leftovers in the fridge for me even after I moved out, text me to see if I was okay. It wasn't grand gestures. It was simple, human kindness, the kind I realized I'd gone years without. I started letting myself accept it. On weekends, I'd visit them just to hang out. We'd order cheap takeout, watch trash TV, and make fun of the ads. It was unremarkable and perfect. No tension, no conditions, no lectures about wasted potential. Just being seen and accepted exactly as I was. For a long time, I didn't think that was possible. That circle of chosen family grew slowly. Other students in the housing program, coworkers from my design job, people who didn't need me to be anything but myself. It wasn't the family I was born into, but it was one I built. And for the first time, I realized that was enough. With my housing stable and work picking up, I finally turned back to what I'd always loved, art. My old professor noticed I was showing up to class again, actually trying. She pulled me aside after a critique one day and said, "You're getting your voice back." It was the nicest thing anyone had said to me in months. I poured myself into my portfolio with a desperation that felt holy. Every late night in the studio was therapy in its own right. I stopped drawing for approval and started drawing for me. The work wasn't perfect. Sometimes it was messy, raw, ugly, but it was honest in a way I hadn't let myself be for years. Opportunities started coming in small but real ways. A friend recommended me for a gig designing event posters. A student club paid me to redo their logo. Each payment, no matter how tiny, was proof I wasn't worthless. I kept every receipt in a folder like a shrine to the fact that I could stand on my own. Then one day I got an email that made me freeze. My professor had nominated me for a summer internship at a local design firm. Paid real-world experience. The kind of opportunity my parents would have bragged about if they'd ever supported me. This time, I didn't need them. I emailed back yes before I could overthink it. Preparing for that interview felt like reclaiming something they'd tried to kill. I stayed up late refining my portfolio, practicing my pitch. I didn't do it to prove them wrong. I did it to prove myself right. That art wasn't a phase. That I wasn't a lost cause. That I was good enough exactly as I was. When my next birthday rolled around, Brooke insisted we celebrate. No pity parties. She said firmly, "We're reclaiming it." I wasn't sure at first. The memory of last year still felt raw, like an old bruise. But she wouldn't let me say no. She rallied our little crew, ordered cheap pizza, and hung a happy birthday banner crookedly across my studio. It was cramped and messy. People sat on the floor, balancing paper plates on their knees. Someone brought a grocery store cake with my name in wobbly frosting. When they sang to me, off-key and loud, I laughed so hard I cried. There was no performance, no forced smiles, just genuine, chaotic joy. I closed my eyes before blowing out the candles. Really, thinking about what I wanted, I didn't wish for revenge or for them to hurt. I didn't even wish for them to apologize. I wished for the courage to keep choosing this life, even when it was hard. To keep choosing the people who chose me back. After everyone left, Brooke stayed behind to help clean up. We sat on the floor surrounded by crumpled napkins and empty cups, leaning against the wall. She nudged me gently. "This is your family now, you know?" I nodded, blinking back tears. Because she was right, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. That night, I went to bed in my own space, my art supplies neatly lined up by the desk, and felt something unfamiliar. Not relief, not safety, but hope. The kind that glows quietly in your chest even when everything else is dark. The kind that says, maybe next year will be even better. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Not just the messy parts, but the healing too. I know I'm not the only one who's been kicked out, cut off, or told they were ungrateful for wanting freedom. Maybe you've felt those chains too, the ones made of money, guilt, or silence. I want you to know you're not alone in this. I won't lie and say it's easy. Starting over felt like being skinned alive some days. But it taught me that real family isn't about blood or shared last names, it's about who shows up when everything falls apart. The people who hold you up when you're too tired to stand. The ones who don't ask you to change to be worthy of love. If this story resonated with you, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people hear stories like this, honest, raw, unfiltered. And if you feel moved to go further, consider hitting super thanks below to support the channel directly. It's that little heart icon under the video. Every bit helps us keep telling the stories that don't get told. But more than anything, I want you to take one thing away from this. You deserve a life that's yours, not the one someone else wrote for you, not the one you're guilt-tripped into living. The one you choose, even if it's hard, even if it's small, even if it starts on a couch in a friend's apartment with nothing but hope in your pocket. Tell me in the comments if you've ever faced something like this. How did you handle it? How did you heal? Let's make this a place where people can be honest about the hard stuff without shame. Because sometimes, the family we choose is the one that teaches us what love really means. Thanks for being part of mine.